The needed context, in her opinion, is best provided by, of course, the natural law. So thus it is because humans are creatures designed for dependency on one another and worship of our creator and sustainer that humility is a virtue. So if we're to have kind of see in the world hierarchy and correct behavior within hierarchies, it wouldn't make sense for the farmer to pass laws because he's not a lawmaker, and so he can make these proclamations, but if no one's following them, then by definition he's not a lawmaker. And so if we're to understand kind of our role within the natural world in hierarchies, then the best way to understand the ultimate hierarchy is for us to understand the proper place of God and the proper place of humans. In fact, probably all of human failure is rooted in that inverse of viewing God at the very least not at the tippy top of all things. Similar comments about the necessary connection between human nature and the proper understanding of particular virtues and vices could be made about a host of other virtues and vices. So it's not just humility here, but in all these things, everything has to be put in their proper understanding in context with human nature. Thus, temperance in food and drink is not a matter of consuming an arbitrary number of calories per day, but temperance is rather fundamentally about approaching food in a way that is sensitive to our physical, social, and spiritual needs as human beings. And to take any one of those out is to not have that full holistic approach that she's wanting from a virtue ethicist. And so rooted in natural law, though, you can be the right person who does the right things for the right reasons. But for her, the grounding has to be in the natural law.
Right. And she says, while some virtue ethicists have turned to the natural law to identify the context for the virtues in the ways that she sketched out, other ethicists who place great emphasis on the virtues have looked outside the natural law and human nature, she says, for a context for the virtues. And she tells us to consider the following accounts of what makes a character trait a virtue that depart rather widely from natural law ethics. For instance, David Hume. He says that a virtue is defined as whatever mental action or quality gives to a spectator the pleasing sentiment of approbation, and vice, the contrary. Yeah. So that's what how he describes virtue. And she's going to explain this in just a minute. Mm-hmm. And then she looks at another example, Julia Driver, who as virtue is a character trait that produces more good actual world and not full of kind of definitions that she says attempt to give us, but those definitions outside of natural law ethics.
Right. All right. So what does it mean? Because Hume seems to be making everything that you could possibly want into a virtue. Well, she says that Hume thus believes that what makes a character trait a virtue is just widespread human approval. So, okay, maybe not individualistically, but if you get 51% of the population to say, oh, yes, this is a good character trait, then it is. Meanwhile, Driver's account...
We count noses, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry, slavery. You're back on the table. More people today. Oh, man. So then with Driver's account is superior to Hume's in that generosity tends to make the world a better place. So, there you're doing the most good for the most number of people. Is a more enlightening and plausible explanation of generosity status as an actual virtue than Hume's. We tend to get happy when we think about generosity. Nevertheless, though, Driver's thoroughgoing consequentialist account of virtue is still inferior to a natural law-based account.
Right. So none of these work for her.
Right.
If we were to discover that a generally optimistic disposition and a keen wit, for instance, are both personally produce more good consequences than bad, it would not follow that these traits are actually virtues, right? She says a trait can be generally valuable without being an actual moral virtue. A virtue is necessary for human excellence. And so you can have a valuable trait or a good trait or whatever, but it's not necessary for human excellence. And therefore, according to what she's suggesting here, under natural law perspective, it's not a virtue. She says developing one's wit, for instance, is certainly one way to manifest excellence, but a keen wit is nonetheless not a virtue because it is not strictly necessary for human excellence. So that's where she is coming from with her definition of what a virtue is. It's a natural law kind of perspective. The virtues allow that are traits that are necessary for human excellence.